All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's program. We are starting just a minute early, so I am going to give you all a chance to get logged in and get settled. I'm just checking right now. I know we've got a phone call from someone who needed some help logging in, so I'm just getting that sent off, and we'll get started in just a minute. I'm very excited today, Louis. I don't know if I told you this, but we had over 300 people sign up for this class. So this is definitely a popular one. I'm excited about this. I know we get a lot of questions about both shade gardens and natives, so this is kind of a double whammy of two of our most popular topics. All right, it is officially noon now, so I'll go ahead and launch us. For those of you who are signing in who have not attended our classes before, first of all, welcome. We're very, very glad to have you. We love doing these programs, and this is going to be a great class today. I do have a couple of notes for you all. I've noticed we have some people signed up from around the country. If you are not attending from Virginia, that is great. We're happy to have you. Just be aware that the native plants that we're discussing today are native to like Garden Zone 7 and the Virginia East Coast area. So just be aware of that, but obviously we're happy to have you here. If you have any questions during the class, please write those questions into the Q&A box or the chat, which I am activating right now. And I will be monitoring those. We do hold our questions for Louis' classes until the end, and this class will run the full hour, and then we'll take up to a half hour following to do Q&A. So if you need to leave the call at an hour, of course we understand. Just know you can access the recording. I'll be sending it out tomorrow, usually around lunchtime. Sometimes it comes later in the afternoon. If you guys have any questions during the class, please feel free to reach out to me and I will help you as best I can. And Louis, thank you so much for being here. As always, I love doing classes with you. And this is a fun topic I've been looking forward to since we got it scheduled. So have at it.
All right. My name is Louis, and I work here at Merrifield over at the Fair Oak store. And I work in the tree and shrub area. And I also, during the wintertime, work in the tropical greenhouse. I actually kind of like it in there. It's nice and toasty warm in the wintertime. I also want to give a special hello to my sister, Lynn. Hi, Lynn. She's going to join us today as well. So I'm pretty excited about that. So today we're going to talk about native plants that actually work in shade. And we're basically going to focus on the native perennials and also the shrubs. So I'm going to toss over to my PowerPoint, and we can go ahead and get started. So when I did this this title, it says shade tolerant. A lot of the plants we're going to talk about today that are natives are actually, they thrive and they do very well in shade, and that's their natural habitat. I'm not sure why I put tolerant in there. A lot of these are tolerant to the sun, and all of them are actually, they like the shade and they actually prefer the shade over the sun. And I'll go into details a little bit about that. So of an overview today of what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about natives, the definition of natives. We're also going to talk about shade and what shade is. We're going to talk about forest succession. It's really important because we want to find out where these shaded type perennials and shrubs come from. We're also going to talk about super blooms, and those are very interesting. And on a personal note, we're going to talk about the native eye, and then we're going to talk a little tiny bit about the native trees that do well in shade. And then we're going to go into some individual shaded plants with the shrubs, and also some that are for the perennials. So with no other ado, let's go ahead and get started. So this photograph here is of a Venus flytrap, and it's probably one of my favorite native plants. It's not hardy to this area. It's actually hardy to North and South Carolina along the coast and the swamp areas down there where it's a zone 8, and kind of a 9-ish to a certain degree. but it is a native plant to the United States, and I find it very awesome. So, but a native plant is considered native if it has occurred naturally in a particular region, ecosystem, or habitat without human introduction. And that definition is from the National Wildlife Federation. Now, this is basically what they mean is before the Europeans came over and started to transport plants from Europe and also from Asia, all the plants here in the United States were native plants. They didn't have anything from any other, across the ocean or anything like that. So these are the plants that we're going to be talking about today. And when you talk about natives, you always want to talk about invasive plants. Invasive plants are plants that are not native. These plants actually come from Europe and also from Asia. And when they come into our country, there is no way for them to basically be contained. In a perfect scenario with native plants, they keep everybody else in balance. So it's a lot of harmony going on here. When you bring and introduce native or non-native plants into the environment, some of those can go rapid because there's no other plants or no other things in there to keep them tamed. So they are non-native to the ecosystem under consideration and whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or human health. There is a lot of native plants that are very aggressive, but it is impossible for a native plant to be invasive. Some plants, and we'll get into this in detail a little bit, actually do act like native, invasive plants because they want to take over the world to a certain degree, but they're doing that for a purpose. And I'll go into detail about that too in our next thing. So, but what is considered shade? Shade is considered the morning sun. When the sun is basically coming up from the east, it is a very weak sun. So the weaker sun tends to plants that like shade prefer that type of sun. And some of these actually with morning sun, they basically bloom a little bit better than when they don't have any sun on them at all. So morning sun, afternoon shade is considered shade. No direct sun ever, like if you're on the north face of a building or something, and they're always consistently in shade, that is also considered shade. The one I like is the dappled sun in forest. So there's little amoebas of sun that hit the ground of the forest. That is still considered shade. And then if you get a little tiny bit of the afternoon sun on plants, not too much, and actually a resting period. And what I mean by that, you get some hot afternoon western or southern sun, and then they go in the shade, and then they get a little bit more, and then they go in the shade for a period of time. A lot of shade plants can actually handle that, but what they can handle is that baking hot, southern and western sun. They usually get kind of crispy. I will go in to talk about native plants in full sun. Most of them actually do very well if they get enough water, and we'll go into detail about that as well. So let's talk about the forest, which is probably one of my favorite topics. When Christopher Columbus discovered America, we were in an old growth forest that spanned from Maine, probably all the way down into Florida. And then it went eastward or westward all the way to the Mississippi and maybe a little bit beyond there. And we were in just a huge, gigantic type of forest, old growth forest. The actual topsoil, which was very, very thick. For millions of years, it's been building up. It's probably some of the best soil that these native plants can actually thrive in. It's very rare these days to see that. So, but if something ever happened in that great forest and it would open up, it would open up because of a tree falling down or a hurricane or a forest fire, then all of a sudden you would have this bare piece of earth. And that bare piece of earth has a succession of how it goes from bare earth back to the old growth forest. And within each one of those stages, there's different types of native plants that thrive in those, and that's what they're supposed to do. When it goes to the beginning, of the bare soil, there's a lot of perennial plants that like sun, and there's a lot of grasses. Crabgrass is probably one of the best things. Mother Nature wants to protect the earth, and we want to protect the dirt. And in doing so, a lot of these plants that just start out is what we consider very aggressive plants. They want to literally go in there and they want to cover up the soil as quickly as possible. So a lot of the native plants that are considered somewhat aggressive are those ones in that stage. Once you go from that stage into, some of the shrubs, and also some of the conifers are starting to creep in. Again, those are somewhat more aggressive than the ones that you would find in an old growth forest. And those are, again, full sun. One of the ones that I love is the sumac. We have a tiger eye sumac in there that actually sends out a lot of suckers. So it does actually form into a big clump. It's a lime green plant, is very attractive. It is considered a little bit on the aggressive side. Some of the other shrubs that actually are in the old growth forest actually start in this stage before they get into that. Once you get it from the shrubbered area, then you go into the pine forest or the conifer forest. One of the plants that transitions into that is the Virginia cedar or the Virginia juniper. It's the red cedar. That plant literally it's one of the secondary or understory type plants that get about 20 feet high. And remember, they're setting the soil up so that these hardwoods can come in. Once you get into the pine forest, we're getting closer and closer into the old growth hardwood forest. One plant actually that I find very interesting is the transition between the pine or the conifer forest into the hardwood forest is the maple. Maples actually send out a ton of those helicopters, and they take over a whole area very quickly, and they grow relatively quickly. And again, those leaves and that shade is getting the soil ready for the old growth forest. And the last one is the hardwood forest. And the hardwood forest is where we find a lot of the shrubs and a lot of the perennials, the native ones, that actually grow in shade. So those are the ones that we're going to be focusing on today, is the ones that thrive in the hardwood forest. So what happens with those shrubs that actually start to grow in a shaded area, and then all of a sudden a tree falls down, and all of a sudden they get full sun? That's when you get into what I call the super blooms. The super blooms is basically where these shaded type shrubs literally get a ton of sun. When they do get a ton of sun, they bloom like 5 or 6 times as more as if they were in the shade, because they're getting a lot more energy. And this is a perfect opportunity for them to literally send out a lot of seeds so they can really reproduce very quickly. When I moved over to Virginia when I was a kid, we had a septic field in the back of our house. And around the edge of that septic field, or that grassy area, there were woods. And the first year we were there, we basically didn't see very many dogwoods blooming. And the reason why is because there's the dogwoods had already set their blooms for a shade type scenario. But since those trees were removed to put in the septic field, those dogwoods got full sun. The next year, we had thousands and thousands and thousands of blooms on all those dogwoods. And then slowly, as the top of those hardwoods came across the shade, the actual blooms became less and less. When it comes to perennials, though, a lot of the perennials that I've been talking about today, they wouldn't be able to take that full sun. What happens is that they basically get shriveled up and they die. And then as soon as those trees start to arise again and they start to produce shade, then the perennials start to move in again and take over the area. So so a lot of the plants that I'm going to talk about today in the shrubs actually are found naturally in the woods, but they actually do very well in sun as well. So let's move on from there. So on a personal note, we want to talk about the native eye. And what I mean by the native eye is I do a lot of hiking in the woods. And the woods is a very, very type of muted garden, in my opinion. There's not a lot of what I call, there's not a lot of Las Vegas. There's not a lot of bells and whistles going on. It's a very calming, a very harmony type environment. And these plants I'm going to be talking about, they're not going to be those type of plants that are going to give you a huge impact when it comes to the the sight of them. They're not going to be all these bells and whistles going on that you would find in a sunny garden, or you would find in like a perennial border where you have this a lot of color. That's not what native plants are all about. What native plants are about is harmony with nature. It brings in nature, it brings the environment back to its core, back to where it originated from. There's a lot of funguses, I have a picture of mushrooms in here. A lot of funguses thrive in this area. And the earth becomes a lot more healthier that way, because that's its natural state. That's what it was like, for 7 million years or 70 million years. So these plants and these native plants are real important to us today to bring back the balance that we used to have with the earth. So a lot of people think too that having a native garden in the shade is going to be more like a weed-looking garden. In some cases, it's all a matter of opinion, but there are different ways in landscaping to take and make somewhat of a formal garden out of native plants, and in doing so, that they look a little bit more less wild and a little bit more formal looking. So, but remember, when you take a lot of these plants we're going to talk about and you put them into a shaded area, they're not going to bloom as much, and they're going to be a little bit more muted. They're going to be a little bit more leggy. They're going to be just a little bit different. But one thing you will notice is it will be a little bit more calming, and there'll be a lot more wildlife that comes in there, because you remember the native wildlife is used to having themselves in this woodland setting, or in this setting of native plants. So you're going to be drawing in a lot of nature. And and for me, when I go into the woods, I can feel that. I can feel the harmony of the forest and of those native plants in there. So let's talk a little bit about the native trees. I have a list here of some of them, anywhere from the sweet bay magnolia to the oak trees, to the maples, the poplars, the beech and the dogwoods, and the redbuds, and the serviceberry and the black gum. All native trees that are in a hardwood garden, basically, or a hardwood forest, basically can take shade. And what happens is when their seeds are produced and put on the ground and they start to grow, they are what I call the patient type of plants. They grow very slowly. They sit there for a long period of time until they get the sun. Once some of the older trees start to come down, those smaller trees start to grow, and they increase in their growth a lot because they're getting all that energy from the sun. And then it's a big race as to who's going to win. And the winner ones, the ones that grow the fastest, are the winners, and those are the ones that pass on the genes. And these trees become stronger and stronger over time because there will always be the ones that win. So I find that real interesting. The beech tree is probably one of my favorites. I think it's because when I was growing up, we had a horse tree in the backyard that actually was a beech tree. Back in the time, they used to set boundaries with trees. I used to bend them over to their side to say, which boundary is from here, which is from there, and surveys and things. And then over time, those trees become very old. And we were fortunate enough to have one of those trees in our yard. We played with it all the time, so it was fun. So I have a special place in my heart for beech trees, but they are probably one of the most patient of all trees. They literally grow very, very slowly, even when they are in full sun. They don't care who wins, but because they will flourish all the way through, all the way until they get to the top canopy. So most of these trees, or all of these trees, do actually do very, very well. The native trees do very well in shade. So let's talk about some shrubs to start with. So these are some of the lists of some of the shrubs that actually like moisture. And I'm going to go into detail about most of these. One of them is Clethra, Alyssum, the silky dogwood, the smooth hydrangea, the native deciduous azalea, the elderberry, and the chokeberry. And these are just a few of them. The Clethra is a shrub. It gets about 3 to 4 feet. Over in Reston at the Reston Nature Center, I saw one over there in shade, and it was probably at least 12 feet high. The neat thing about this plant is that it actually was one of the last flowering native shrubs that we have. So all those perennials are out there, or all those pollinators are out there, and you literally, when they get into bloom, you will see pollinators on there that you've never seen before. Some of them are as small as maybe an inch, and other ones are really big. Some of them are even half an inch. It's always interesting. You can go down there and just stare, and as you stare, you see more and more pollinators on there. One thing that happened to me when I was watering these things, is I do like to be in water, especially in full sun. They like to be real moist. Is a lot of predators of the pollinators are attracted to these as well, because they want to eat up some of the pollinators. I had a bumblebee, and one of these big wasps came on it and actually stung it and ate it in front of my eyes. I was like, gosh, here's nature at its best. I mean, the hornet's not bad; it's just hungry. But this plant gets really, really a lot of pollinators on there. The other neat thing about it is that it is scented. It smells really good. Another name for it is called summer sweet, and there's a reason for that. For the 2.5 weeks that it's in full bloom, it literally will give you an incredible fragrance. So, and they do come in a pink color as well. They do look a little bit like bottle brushes when they're in bloom. And then in the fall, their actual flower leaves turn into a beautiful yellow. And they actually do, even in deep shade, they do bloom fairly well. Another one is elderberry. Elderberry is a plant that can get 8 to 10 feet high. We have one that's called Adams, which is a cultivar. Adams, literally, the flowers are about as big as the Annabelle flowers. Once they get pollinated, they basically start to get berries on them, and the berries are green. And then over time, they turn into a reddish color. Because Adams is a variety, all of Adams are exactly the same genetic makeup. And in doing so, it means that they can't pollinate themselves. The elderberry is not boys and girls. They do have what I call perfect flower, which means that they have the male and the female part, but they can't pollinate themselves. If you have 2 of them, because they're genetically the same, they can't produce berries. So you have to get another type or another cultivar or the true species of elderberry to cross-pollinate it to get the berries on it. And the berries are spectacular. I mean, it is, again, one of my most favorite plants because of this. And the berries themselves are extremely healthy for you. This is a rare find to find this many berries on them. They are perfectly ripe right now. And they literally, I'm surprised that the birds haven't eaten them already, because the birds just love these things. So this is Adams elderberry. It's very interesting. We have one that's a native one, that's a true species growing outside near our dogwoods. and it's between two sheds. It grew up like 8 feet, and then at the top, when it got into the sun, it literally got a super bloom on it. It was very, very interesting. A colleague of mine showed it to me a couple of years ago. So another plant that I like, and this is kind of unique because it is a evergreen. A lot of native plants are deciduous. There's a few out there that are evergreen, and this happens to be one of them, but they literally are very rare to a certain degree. When you go out in the woods during the wintertime, it's rare to find a shrub or anything out there other than, in our area, it's the American holly. But the Alyssum is another one of my plants that I actually love. And the reason why is that the leaves themselves smell really, really good. And they're very, very deer resistant because of that. You don't want to smell the flowers. The actual flower smell is almost like a wet dog smell. So, and they do actually, because they smell like that, they do attract a lot of pollinators. But these plants literally like to be in moisture, and they love the shade, and they do retain a very dense type of look in the shade as well. When you take some of the evergreens like the mountain laurel and the rhododendrons, they tend to get a little bit more sparse, but the Alyssum basically stays pretty dense in shade. It does flower on and off through the whole summer too, which is really nice. The one down at the bottom right is the Florida Sunshine, and it does remain with the lime green even in deep shade. So that is always a good idea. So another one is the smooth hydrangea. Another name for that is the Annabelle hydrangea. They're incredible. I saw one of these over at the Meriwether Post home, and literally it was in shade and there was a sprinkler system. So that thing was consistently moist. They do very well in shade, and they produce a lot of flowers in shade. The Annabelle itself is the white one. It's kind of a limey green white. The heads on those can actually be as big as my head. And the reason why I know that is a customer came in one time and asked me and told me that her Annabelle flowers were bigger than my head. And I was a little sarcastic, and I said, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Why don't you bring one in and let me see it?" And she did. And it literally was as big as my head. It was a beautiful, beautiful flower. The problem that you run in with the true species Annabelle is the flowers themselves have a lot of weight on them, and so they do tend to flop. One way to get around that is to put other plants to support them, and they kind of flop on the other plants. They did come out with another variety that's been around for, gosh, probably about 20 years, and it's called Incredible. And Incredible literally has the same type of flower size, but the stems on it are a lot more strong, so they actually can support the flowers a lot better than the original Annabelle. There's all sorts of different varieties out there. There's some dwarf varieties, and there's also some varieties that literally go from a very light pink into a dark burgundy color. They don't get as big as the Annabelle or the Incredible. There's a limey one out there too, which I always find really nice. One thing that we have out there right now is a bunch of the native azaleas. Native azaleas are extremely underutilized. They bloom at really different times during the year. Most of them bloom in the early spring, but there is some that actually bloom in the summer. And the plum leaf one is one of those. We do have one that's actually, I believe there's a small flower on them. In the woods, they look like red and pink clouds because they are sparse. They do flower very well, but you can see through them. So they look like floating flowers, and they can get quite large. I mean, I've seen them in the woods probably where I go hiking. In the spring, I've seen some of them that can get, at least 12 feet high eventually. But again, they're not going to be that dense. This is one of those plants that if you do put it in full sun, it will give you a ton of flowers on it. The super bloom photograph that I showed you before is the deciduous azalea with thousands and thousands of flowers on it. So these are all, really interesting looking, and they're very, very underutilized. Most of these, again, are true species. So when you look at it like the Piedmont, there's all sorts of variation in their flowers, from one to the other. We're talking, this is a more of a species more so than a cultivar. It's not a plant that they're all genetically the same. So some of these can be a little bit more pink, while other ones can be a little bit more white. We also have this one, which is a highly fragrant one. This one is white, and all the pistons and stuff on it are a nice red. Again, these are very, very muted looking plants. They do like to be moist. I find them along the stream beds to a certain degree, and they thrive in that area. They do suck to a certain degree as well. The coastal is one of my favorites. The reason why is that the outside bud is very, very colorful. And then as it opens up, it goes from that darker pink into lighter pinks and almost into more of a white color. Beautiful plant. And again, all the bees and all the pollinators love this plant. The swamp one literally can grow almost in water, in almost a boggy area. So if you have a really wet area in the shade or even in the sun, this plant would thrive for you. This one here is the one that is actually a cultivar. It's called the Pixter bloom, and that one is highly, highly fragrant. And this is a super bloom. This one is in full sun, and they do last for about 2.5 weeks. If we have a very mild spring and they're in bloom, the blooms are going to last a lot longer. If they're in a more shaded area and a little bit more hot to a certain degree, they're not going to last as long. But when they're in bloom, they're extremely spectacular. Okay, so one of the other plants that likes to be in a little bit of a moist area is the chokeberry. Chokeberries are, again, a plant that I keep saying this over and over and over again. I love the chokeberry. I love the Elysium. I like all these, all these native plants. They add so much to the environment. This is what I call a 3-season plant. And the reason why I say that, it has very distinctive looks. The look in the springtime is this plant comes out with a few leaves and then it flowers. Their flowers are white and they're kind of speckledy looking, and you get a ton of them. And then as those petals fall off, you get the berries on them. And the berries are very large. If you look at that picture of there's red berries and there's blackberries. This is a blackberry one. They're beautiful when they're in berry form. We had some next to the shrub hut, and a couple of our chipmunks would climb up and they would toss them up the air and catch them with their mouths. I'm just joking, but they would go up there and they would literally eat them. They're a great source of food for wildlife. And then again, once the berries are starting to go away, you get this incredible fall color of this orangey red before the leaves fall off. It's a great plant to have. There is a variety of this that is a dwarf variety that stays low to the ground, and then most of them get about 8 to 10 feet high eventually. A great plant to use in a garden when you really want to have nature come in, because you're thinking about the pollinating of the flowers, but you're all thinking about feeding the wildlife with the berries as well, with the birds and with some of the little creatures. Now let's talk a little bit about the evergreens. I did mention.
Quick, sorry to break in.
Evergreen?
Is there a pink cultivar of chokeberry that has pink flowers?
I'm sorry, what?
Is there a cultivar of chokeberry that has pink flowers?
I don't know of that one.
Okay, all right.
What I know of is the white.
Okay, thank you.
We don't carry a pink one. There probably might be a pink one out there.
Okay.
I've never seen a pink one, with the ones that we have out there.
Okay, thanks. All right, sorry about that.
That's all right. So the evergreens, I said that we don't really have very many of them. One of them I already mentioned is the Elysium. Elysium is a one of those that likes the moisture areas. Let's get into some of these evergreens that actually can thrive in more drier type of atmosphere. And one of them is the mountain laurel. The mountain laurel blooms in May. It blooms in late May. It always blooms around my birthday, so I know that. When I go hiking on my birthday, I always see a lot of mountain laurel that are in full bloom at the end of May. They literally have an incredible flower design. And what I mean by that, when you're looking at this flower, the piston heads are actually embedded in the petal. And once a bee lands on the stigma in the middle, the actual pistons, they loosen up from the petals and they slam right into the bee or the pollinator and puts all their pollen onto them. And in doing so, that pollinator literally has powdery type pollen all over it. And then when it goes to another mountain laurel, it will definitely be able to pollinate it. So I really love the idea of that flower. If anything else, there's a colleague of mine, this is her favorite shrub. The actual buds themselves are very, very interesting as well. You look at that picture over to the left, those little tiny pink looking berries, if you will, those are actually the buds of a mountain laurel. And they are almost as interesting as the flower themselves. One thing about this plant, though, is that it's leggy. And what I mean by that is over time, the bottom of it loses its leaves, and all you will see is wood. For a woodland garden or for a natural garden, we love that. We love to see the structure. The wood on a mountain laurel is very, very smooth and almost looks like mahogany. And then above that, you get a very, very loose type of canopy, and you have the flowers on it. It is an evergreen as well. And they do literally grow slowly, but over time they do get quite large. And they do like acidic soil to a certain degree. But this is a great pollinator type plant for for in your garden. The rhododendrons, there's a lot of tons of them up in Pennsylvania. And I think they're probably one of the most beautiful of all. But they are very, very hard to grow in our area with the clay. And you ask me, well, the clay was there before. Why is it that it's hard now? You got to remember that when you had the old growth forest before the settlers came over from Europe, basically the topsoil was a couple feet in depth, and literally it's like a sponge. And what I mean by that, it had all the plant material of all the broken down plants, and then plus it had a lot of clay, because remember, those worms go down there and they literally eat the plant material. They go down, they poop it out, and they bring the clay up. The clay is actually very good. It just doesn't perk. It has a lot of minerals in it. There's a lot of really good things for plants, but air doesn't go through it. So the rhododendron and also the mountain laurel, they tend to like spongy, moist, with a lot of air pockets, a lot of a lot of good soil, if you will, to to keep it thriving. And in our area, it's very, very hard to do it. Once you get it established, then it will grow like you wouldn't believe. And I've actually seen them in full sun once they are established, and they're beautiful. But to get them that way is a very hard thing to do. People are successful at it, don't get me wrong, but it's not one of those plants I would go for the people that don't have a lot of experience with them so far. But when they're in bloom, they are unbelievable. Over in Ireland, they're actually invasive. That's the perfect scenario, is over in Ireland and the way that they grow over there. They do literally tend to be white, and there's a lot of them that are actually different shades of pink that are native, or that are native flowers. So one of my favorite all-time plants for our area and natives, and just the plants in general, is the American holly. American hollies normally grow to, 20, 25 feet. They thrive in the woods. They're always, they're not very dense in the woods. They do produce berries. There's boys and girls on them. The one thing I love about them is that they give berries, they give flower, so they're good for pollinators, they're good for birds, they're good for nature. They're also a little prickly, so they're good for protection. A lot of birds hide in these. The Maryland holly is a dwarf variety of that, meaning that it doesn't get too big. So this is a great plant to use for birds to go into. It's also good for a formal garden. You can trim these into a nice hedge or something like that. So if you want native plants that look a little bit more formal, this would be a good one to use for you. The inkberry is another holly. This one does tend to get a little bit more leggyish. They are boys and girls. We have to check them in the springtime to see what the parts are of the flowers. We thought that Nordic was actually a boy. Kind of find out it wasn't. But our inkberries here at the nursery do produce berries, so there has to be some males around somewhere. One of the neat things about this plant is that it can tolerate a lot of moisture, but it can also tolerate a lot of drought. It is also a leggy plant, meaning that the bottom of it is going to give you a little bit more wood structure and a little less leaves. So you'll be able to see the branches at the bottom. For me, I love leggy plants, and the reason why, it's a good opportunity to see the structure, but it's also a good opportunity to get perennials in there. Remember, in the natural habitat, in the native habitat, the leggy plants actually had beautiful perennials underneath them. They complement each other very nicely. The bayberry, there's southern bayberry and there's northern bayberry. As the years go on, the southern bayberry is doing better and better in our area. They literally have a great scented leaf on them. Anytime I go by that plant, I actually smush a leaf. It smells so good. They do come in boys and girls. We don't sell them in boys and girls, but the ones that are bearing in the fall are going to be the girls. The ones that aren't bearing are the boys. And you do definitely need one of both to make sure that the girl berries on them. This plant can get about 12 feet high. It does get a little, less dense in the shade. In full sun, it does get to be very dense. It's a great border plant, but in the shade, it literally, you'll be able to see through it to a certain degree. And then these are some other plants, if you want to stick around towards the end of my seminar, I tend to go over a little bit of some of the plants that we can go over that also like to be in a shaded area. And I think that I'm going to give a list to her to actually, if you have an email or anything like that, that she would be able to send you that list. So
yeah, I'll be sending a list
Sally would
tomorrow.
be wonderful in doing that. So, but I did this seminar in the classroom, and I had a list for everybody. So now let's look at perennials. One of my favorite things of all times are ferns. Ferns are ancient plants. They've been around since the time of the dinosaurs, and I love them. I love them. There's some of them that are native, that are evergreen, like the Christmas fern, that literally will stay green all through the winter time. And then there's also ones that actually die to the ground. There's also clumping and running forms. And what I mean by that, ferns in general get to the same height every year, but they actually grow by being a bigger mass. Some of those are a clumping mass, meaning that that clump gets bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And some of them are runners, meaning that they send a root through the soil, and then the fronds come off of that root, so they run around. A lot of people think that these plants, especially ones like the hay-scent fern, which is a running fern, it can take over an area very, very quickly. It's aggressive. It's not invasive. This plant is designed on floodplains and stuff. As soon as the flood comes through, those ferns go in there to try to hold down the soil. It's a great plant to use for for erosion control in a shaded area. One of the other things about it is the way it reproduces. It reproduces by spores. And some of these you can turn over and you can see the bottom of the leaves, and they have spores, things on the back of them that are all lined up. There was a customer of mine that came in and asked me what kind of insect it was that would line up like soldiers on the back of their ferns. And so I had to explain to them what was going on with that. One of the neat things about ferns too is that they literally have a lot of different types of looks to them. The one on the left is called the cinnamon fern, and that's a native. Those brown things look like cinnamon sticks, and those are the reproductive areas. The bottom one is the fiddle leaf, or the fiddles that come in the springtime on the Christmas ferns, which I just love. And then the one at the top is basically the woody part of the reproductive part of an ostrich fern. So they look really neat even in the wintertime. My all-time favorite fern, though, is a maidenhair fern, and we do have some native maidenhair ferns in the area. This one was actually up at Old Rag. I saw wild native maidenhairs. It's always fun when you go out hiking and you see native plants that you know what they are, and they're thriving in the woods. Another one is trillium. Trilliums are a runner. They come in all sorts of different varieties. There's some that are pink, red, white, yellow, and they actually can take over an area. They like very, very rich soil. They like that topsoil that I mentioned before. They're somewhat hard to grow, but once they take, you will literally be able to keep them from year to year. It's just hard to get them to take there with our having so much clay and not enough of the material stuff in our soil these days. So the woodland phlox is probably one of my favorite plants when it comes to the shadies, natives, and it actually just natives or perennials in general. It is a evergreen. It's an evergreen that literally produces incredible flowers in the springtime. They do run, so they make nice groves. I do woodland garden seminar, and I design woodland gardens, and I always use this plant. It's almost like a really good carpeting. And when it comes up, it is amazing. I always try to literally pair it up with tiarella. Tiarella is the foam flower, and they bloom about the same time. You know, imagine this blue with these white bottle brush type looking flowers on it. It's just amazing look to it. And they do bloom in the springtime, and they are a runner, meaning that they will spread out very nicely for you. These are some of the ones in nature. If you look at the one with the big tree in it, there's white plants that are coming through are the trillium, and then you have the white phlox and you have the purple phlox on the other side of the screen. It is a beautiful plant. And then we have turtle heads. Turtle heads actually bloom now. I do have one in back of me. Turtle heads tend to love to be in the shade, and they actually flower very, very well in the shade. If you do put them in a little bit more sun, this is one of those that can take some sun. They literally need more moisture, but they bloom late in the season, and they actually, there's a reason why they're called turtle heads. It's because their flowers look like turtle heads. They look like they're sticking out of a shell. Incredible plant to use. They come in white and they also come in pink. They get about 2 feet high. They're not much of a spreader. I've never seen them really sucker very much, but they make a really nice grove in the shade. There's very few plants that actually bloom in the late spring or late summer, natives, and this is one of them. So the woodland poppy is endangered. It is by far an incredible plant. I would pair it up with your Virginia bluebells. They bloom around the same time. The neat thing about it is that it will seed very easily. It will not seed on a lot of mulch. You know, if the seeds land on a piece of bark, they will not germinate. So when they go into seed form, it's a good idea to put a little bit of enriched topsoil or something down so that they can start to take off. Once you plant some of these in the ground, you'll notice every year you'll get more and more of them. They're an incredible looking type of plant for shade. They're very, very bright yellow, and again, they're endangered, so they need all the help they can get right now. This is what they look like, and there is some Virginia bluebells in this photograph. After they flower, then they have their seed pods, and the seed pods are real fuzzy. And then they do what I call the second bloom, where the seed pod will open up and look like a flower that looks towards the ground, and the seeds fall out. You can collect those seeds and move them around in your garden, but it's a very natural looking plant. But with that intensity of yellow, they really show it very nicely in a dark shaded area. The crested iris is another one of all of them are my favorites. I'll just tell you right now. This one does tend to hug the ground to a certain degree. They do make groves. They are a rhizome, and they travel on very close to the surface, and they're evergreen. They look like grass. And then in the early spring, they actually bloom. And they bloom for probably about 2.5 weeks. When they're in bloom, they're stunning looking, especially when you have a grove of them. The flowers are extremely unique. A beautiful plant to use. And again, even when they're not in bloom, they are an evergreen, so they give a nice texture to the bottom of a garden. They only get about maybe 6, 7, sometimes 8 inches high. I do have a sample of those that we might want to look at later. But it is a great plant to use, and again, when they're in full bloom, they're amazing. It also comes in a very nice white form of flower on theirs. The woodland asters, now this actually blooms in the late spring, or I'm sorry, the late summer. I always thought that asters actually bloomed in full sun. These asters, these are woodland asters. They tend to bloom in the shade, and they literally, when there's bees get on them, they're amazing. We have some out there, and there's always bees on them right now. They're wonderful for pollinators. They do spread very nicely. They spread out, through suckers, and they bloom in the late spring. So they're kind of weedy looking to a certain degree, but again, they're really important for the pollinators. Now, this is a very neat plant. I do a pollinating tour here at Merrifield in the fall, and again in the springtime. And this plant, I always point out, this is a native ginger. It is a ground cover, and it also is a evergreen. It does set up groves. It's a runner to a certain degree. But the neat thing about it is that the flowers actually lay on the ground, and they look like the Addams family flower. It's very distorted looking. But ants go in there, and they get pollen on them, and then they go to another one, and they pollinate. So ants are a great pollinator for this plant. It's great to use in a woodland setting. It's great to use as a ground cover in a wood area, especially like if you don't have any enough sun for grass and stuff. A lot of these low growing type of plants, such as the native ginger and also the woodland phlox and also the iris, are great plant replacements for that. If you're worried about stepping in or something like that, then basically you can put stepping stones down to go through them. So the cardinal flower is another plant that actually can take a little bit of sun if it's in a lot of moisture. When I run, I actually see one of these. I pass it like every other day over on the cross county trail, which I really enjoy looking at that plant. And it is one of those plants that the hummingbirds just love. And they are one that blooms right now. So they are very nice. They literally come in a blue form as well. Here's a hummingbird going to pollinate one of them. They're really good for hummingbirds. They're like the perfect structure for them. And they also come in blue. The blue ones, I've seen hummingbirds on them. A lot of people think that, you know, hummingbirds only go after red plants, but they actually they pollinate some of the blue ones as well. There is a cultivar at the bottom that actually has a very, very dark leaf on it, which is really attractive. And then we go into grasses. There is a bunny blue sage that is an evergreen. It literally is a clumping form. It doesn't run. It can take a lot of moisture, but it's a shade grass. And again, it's clumping. It doesn't run through and take over an area. The clump just gets bigger and bigger and bigger over time. This is one of those plants that you can dig up like you would a hosta and cut it into pieces and move it around so that eventually you can get a big grove of this that grows in shade where the grass doesn't grow. The neat thing about it too is that it's blue. It's a blue type of plant instead of having it green. So there's some contrast on there. The golden star is a plant that loves moisture. And this one actually you can walk on to a certain degree. It does flower in the spring. And those flowers, literally, you get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them when you're really close to a stream or someplace that's really, really moist. It will take over the area very nicely. So I highly recommend this if you have problems with erosion or something, or streams that come up in the area, to put some of this down, because it will take over the area as a runner, and it literally will keep that soil in place for you. So that's what it looks like, you know, from a distance. And again, you know, all these flowering plants, they are great for pollinators. They're great for the bees. So trillium is one that I said that recommend to use with the woodland phlox. The height of them is about the same as a woodland phlox. This flower structure on here is a lot different than the flowers of the woodland phlox, so they literally complement each other very nicely. There are these that are clumpers, and that clumper gets bigger and bigger every year. Some of the leaves on some of these can actually be very unique. The other thing on it is there's a few varieties that are runners that actually will go through and run just like the phlox would. So a beautiful ground cover. Once they go out of bloom, if you wait a while, you sporadically get a couple flowers here and there on that. And so here's a list of all the a lot of the other ones. I knew I would not have time to go through all of them, and this is just you know, there's more than just what I have on here. Spiderwort, the Indian pink, which is the one at the photograph of. So beautiful, very, very unique, and it is blooming now. The Allegheny Pachysandra is a just like the regular Pachysandra to a certain degree. That's not a native, except it grows a lot slower. So it will teach you a lot of patience. There's a golden ragweed, which is a brilliant yellow plant. We also have a Hepatia provalia, which is one that I think is also a spring femoral. If you're going to buy that today, you actually buy it in a pot that looks like it just has dirt in it, because it did come out in the springtime. The creeping wintergreen is a native to the Northwest. It is wintergreen. The berries on there are literally, if you taste them, they do taste like winterberry, like the toothpaste, which I found amazing. And the new growth on that is a woody plant to a certain degree, and it is an evergreen, and it is a ground cover. But the tips on that thing are red. The leaves are red, and then as they mature, they go into a more greener look. And then you have the shooting star, which is a type of bulb, literally, that comes up as a very, very dated plant or dating plant. The bleeding heart, I saw actually one of those out in Oregon growing, in a natural setting, which I was amazed about. It's not the traditional one that blooms in the spring, and it can bloom more than once through the season. Then we have bugbane, which is a very, very tall plant that looks like it has some like bottle brushes that are like 2 feet high. It is a runner, so it will creep through. It's a beautiful plant if you need height in your garden. So, and there's a few more that I can go through with you on that. So I always end with the lawn chair. And the reason why I do that is, all the gardeners out there, they're like, plantaholics, meaning they're constantly working and working and working in their gardens. They're trimming back this, they're weeding this, they're putting in a new border, they're rearranging plants, they're doing this. Every once in a while, I think it's really important for a gardener to go and sit and appreciate their garden instead of looking at it as something that they need to, work on, and to appreciate it. And what I picked out is a lawn chair is it can be moved around. When you have some area of your garden that actually is in full bloom and all the pollinators are half at it and all the berries are on your, your winter berry, and just go over there and sit and just enjoy it. So it's really important to me that the gardeners get out there and just sit and enjoy instead of constantly working in the garden. So that's my presentation. I do have a bunch of flowers and stuff around here. And I would love to, this plant right here.
I'm going to jump in for a minute, Louie, if you don't mind.
Which is, a plant that's in full flower right now. I said it blooms more than once. I do have the Carrick's bluegrass, which is wonderful. And then,
Louie, if you don't mind, I'll jump in for a minute.
Okay.
Just real quick, because now's a good point. It is 1 o'clock. So for anybody who has to leave, if you're on for your lunch hour, just a reminder, we are recording. I will be sending out a link to the recording, including the rest that you had to miss. So no worries if you have to leave. Please feel free to send us a question through Eventbrite or to my email address, and I or Louie will follow up with you if you have any questions that you didn't get to get answered. So just had to go ahead and say that. And a quick pitch for anybody who has to leave. We have a Caitlin Ackerhouse is doing a class on native containers. If you like container gardening with natives, on Saturday at the Merrifield store. So quick pitch. All right. Sorry, Louie, for the interruption.
No, it's
Back
okay.
to class.
So I would love to maybe, spend a few minutes at least. I brought all these plants up here for a reason.
Oh, no. No. You've got time. Just need to let everybody know that they can go and we're recording. So.
Okay, so this is the one I really wanted to show you. This one here is elderberry. I don't know if I can do this, but let me see if I can try. This is in full berry form right now. And this is what the berries look like on it. And think of those berries as flowers. And the bees were all over this thing. This is Adams. Adams was developed years and years ago from one plant. Remember, elderberry, each one of the plants have a different type of genetic makeup, and sometimes some of them just are incredible. So they reproduce that same one over and over and over again. So this plant right here is a winter fir type of viburnum. Winter fir and brandywine tend to go together. Again, because they're perfect flowers, so they both have male and female parts, but they can't pollinate themselves because they're the same genetic makeup. The actual flowers on here are white. Then they go in and produce berries. Those berries go from white into pink, and then from pink into dark blue. Once they go into that dark blue mode, then the birds know that they can eat them. They're all nice and ripe. Another plant is this dark leaf one back here. And this is 9 bark. nine bark, there's two dwarf varieties. One of them is called is tiny wine, and the other one is called Little Devil. They are dwarf variety. Actual other types of nine bark tend to get about 5-6 feet high, and they have a more of a forsythia type look to them. They kind of cascade down. The other neat thing about that plant is that they do flower with muted whitish pink flowers on them that line the branches, and then they get these very, very unique looking seed pods on them. We also have this plant here, which, I mean, I don't know if you can see this or not, but this is chokeberry. And I am going to find out about pink flowered chokeberry. I'm very intrigued by that. But anyway, the berries on this thing are really, really big. And then again, these leaves are going to go into a really bright orangey color during the fall before they fall off. This plant right up here is our turtle heads. That's the one that the actual flower on it looks like a head of a turtle. Way back in this area right in here is we have the abelia, or the cardinal flower, and that one is in bloom right now. That's the one that the hummingbirds just love. We also have a variety of the Annabelle here. It's starting to go out of bloom, but there is one that's just starting up. You can deadhead those to a certain degree. This one right here is the Indian paint variety of perennial that has that very, very unique flower. And then we also have the Maryland holly right here. That's the ground cover. The Maryland holly is a female, so it is going to berry for you. There's always plenty of males in the area because it is a native, and a lot of them grow in the woods. So they basically do get pollinated. It's rare for us to actually get a male American holly in here. So, and that gives you a little taste. Oh, you know something else? Yeah, blueberries. Blueberries, if they weren't so good, they would still literally be a great plant for in your garden. The reason why, their blueberries are very attractive. They also get the nice little white flowers on them that are great for pollinators. They do very well in the shade. I see a ton of them in the woods. They are a little sparse, don't get me wrong, but they do well in the woods. They like very acidic soil. The other neat thing about them too is that in the fall, they literally turn into a bright red leaf. The leaves on them are almost as red as the burning bush plant. They're very, very vibrant. And there is a couple of varieties of them that literally get some red stems on them. So, oh, I also have a maidenhair fern back here. I'm doing maidenhair ferns indoors. And what's funny about it is I always thought that the indoor maidenhair fern was an annual, meaning you brought it inside, you enjoyed it for a week or two. Sometimes you can actually grow it for a month, and then it would die, and then you have to go get another one. I pretty much know all the plants here in Maryville. I know all the trees, shrubs, perennials, annuals. I know just about all of them. Every once in a while I get lucky and I find a new one I don't know about. But of every single plant in Maryfield, I believe that the indoor maidenhair fern is the hardest plant to grow. So I was determined that I was going to grow one. So I set up this thing, and hopefully we can do a seminar about it, right, Sally?
Yes. and this makes me laugh. I'll tell you why in a minute.
And literally, it has been about 8 months, and they're growing, and I actually transplanted them, and they're still growing. And I put a mess of other ferns and other really high humidity type plants in there, and I would love to share that with you. So, but anyway,
okay, so
I'm done.
My wonderful grandmother, and I'm from Northeast Florida, she has maidenhair ferns, the ones you're talking about, that grew in her backyard for years, that are like 3 feet wide, and they just grow, and they're stunning. So I laugh, yeah. But yes, indoors, I very hard to take care of, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Those particular ones. Anyways, yeah. So just a thought.
So is there any questions or anything?
Yes. All right, everybody. So we've got about 20 minutes. We will take as many questions as we can. Again, if you want to jump off and you want the recording, please feel free to contact me. I sent my email out by chat. I'm going to start and focus on questions that apply kind of generally. If you have questions that are something that more so the plant clinic would cover, like pruning, pests, stuff like that, follow up with me after the class if you can, and I'll refer you to our plant clinic, because we're probably not going to have time to get to those, but we will do our best to get through everything that we can. Louis, the first question is one that came in early, and I want to make sure I was correct on this. The Little Jim magnolia, that is a southern magnolia, correct?
Yes.
It's not okay. So the southern magnolia is native to the southeast, and then the sweet bay is the one that's native in Virginia. So
Yes.
just wanted to confirm that.
Now the sweet bay magnolia literally can grow in the woods. It's a semi-evergreen, meaning that in a very mild winter, it will keep its leaves. It's highly fragrant, and it does give you those cone shapes with the red berries on them that are great for birds.
Okay. All righty.
And a side note on that, we did have some big leaf magnolias in here, which is literally the biggest North American native plant, and it is extremely unique. The leaves can get about 24 to 36 inches in length, and only about 12 inches wide. I did see one of those out in nature, a place where I went for a hike. I was shocked that I actually saw it, but it's a very unique
Smoky
plant.
Mountain National Park. The big leaf magnolias with the really big leaves.
Yes.
Yeah, I've seen one there. They're really cool. Very cool. All right, here's a question, and this, I know there's a whole discussion around this. So Louis, I'll start by saying, if you're someone who wants to dig into this topic about natives, nativars, cultivars, Caitlin's class on Saturday is a great one. She's very, very passionate about that discussion and has all kinds of research that she discusses.
Yeah, well, one thing is that, if you ever want to, come in or actually talk to me on the phone about very, very specific type of plants that you need that are native, like within the 9-bark, we have at least like 10 different varieties of 9-bark. We have like probably 5 different varieties of Tia. We have 4 different varieties of chokeberry. I mean, if I went into that much detail, then I would not have been able to. I would be here for like 4 hours.
No, yeah. Okay, so here's a question for you that's kind of on this topic, and you can address it as much or as little detail as we have time for. But for the cultivars, will the birds eat the berries of those berrying bushes? Will they eat the cultivar berries as well, or do they not eat those berries?
Yes, a cultivar is basically taking one variety of a natural plant and reproducing that.
Okay.
It was not made in a chemical lab. They found a lot of attributes on a plant and they liked it. So what they did is they started to reproduce that plant. And in doing so, they literally, just like the Adams plant here, the elderberry. There are other type of variety of plants. For instance, the big leaf magnolia, the Annabelle, which actually are one of those that they genetically went in and did stuff to it or whatever, to produce different varieties of that. So there are 2 different pathways there. But on all the berries that I know of that are produced on our native plants, the birds do eat them.
Okay. Is the plumleaf azalea the same as the Cumberland azalea? It's rhododendron cumberlandens.
I don't know. I can find that out. I can look on the internet. But
okay. Yeah, contact us if you want us to check on that for you, and we will. All right, next question. This will apply to watering question. What does moist mean? Along a stream, water them every day. How wet? Can you talk a little bit about that for plants that like to be moist?
So if you have a place in your yard that basically is moist, so what I mean by that is the drainage, the water goes into an area and it stays moist for a period of time, then basically that is a moist area. Most of the plants that we have here that like moist areas, meaning the clethra, the Elysium, the chokeberry, and all the other ones that I mentioned, they thrive in moist areas, especially if you're going to put them in the sun. Most of them can adapt to a more drier type of atmosphere as well. I mean, I have seen, the big leaf magnolia in full sun. During July and August, if it doesn't get enough water, it does get a little crispy, but it will not die from that. So it is a little bit more tolerant. The chokeberry, the same sort of scenario. The clethra literally can grow fine in an area that's not, but they prefer to be in a little bit of moist. So when you're first establishing these plants, make sure that you water them correctly. What I mean by that, you want to water them slow and thoroughly and saturate them. Then let them dry out to a certain degree. And in doing so, when that water starts to dry out, that root system starts to follow that water down. So you get a deep root system. So that plant will be a lot more drought tolerant. But once these plants get established, in most cases, they literally would be able to be fine. If we do go into a drought mode, it is always a good idea to water some of these plants that like to be a little on the moist side. When you do water them very slowly, so that's a very deep watering. And you can do that probably about every 2 to 3 weeks once they get established.
Okay. All right, I'm having a look through our questions here to try and hit some that apply to everybody. Okay, we get this question a lot. Mountain laurel seems hard to grow. This person had a healthy one that died. I have heard this from some people and heard they're easy to grow from other people. Is it a planting location issue? What are your opinions on this?
Okay, so mountain laurel I've seen in mountains that are very dry. On the side of the mountains that are like this. So they're very, very dry. But the soil that they're in, once the water hits it, it acts like a sponge. So it has a lot of air in there, but also has a moisture. So it's very hard to mimic that. If you have mountain laurel that's growing in your yard, literally when you move in or naturally there, then leave it alone. If you're trying to establish it, then it can be somewhat challenging.
Okay, so it's a soil issue.
That you water it, making sure that it literally will dry out. It's a little bit more complicated than some of the other plants that we have.
Gotcha. Okay, so if you want to plant mountain laurel, maybe talk to our team about getting your soil amendments done and everything.
Yeah, I mean they do tend to like acidic soil.
Gotcha.
They like highly organic material, well drained soil. Meaning, and in our area, we have clay. Clay is not well drained. It takes a long time for that water to go through the clay. So the more rich and the more healthier that soil is, the more that the mountain laurel and the rhododendrons are going to thrive.
Okay. All right, next question. So for the spring ephemerals that you discussed, like the bluebells, the poppies, one, when is the best time to actually plant those plants? And two, can you talk a little bit about the timing of when they bloom? We had a few questions on that.
Okay. So the best time to plant, and you can plant them now if you're not going on vacation. We do not have any of the Virginia bluebells right now, unfortunately. But we do get a ton of those things in the springtime. They do tend to like to be in a little bit of a moist area. I see a lot of them over near the Potomac River. I also see them down at Bull Run. There's a whole bunch of them there that are somewhat of a moist area. And then also the poppies, the wood poppies, we have those right now. They were just cut back. And literally you can plant those now, or you can plant them in the fall. In the spring is another time to plant them. So when you're talking about when they bloom right before all the leaves come out on the trees. So when they start to bloom, you'll see a little tiny bit of lime green going on It's usually right before the dogwoods start to bloom, I believe. I don't know the exact dates on those, but they do bloom together. The poppies themselves literally will reseed, and in doing so, each year you get more and more and more of those. But you got to remember that if they do land on a piece of bark or something, they won't reseed very easily. Now, the mountain laurel is not I mean, not the mountain laurel, the bluebells, Virginia bluebells, they tend to become a bigger clump. They're not one of those that actually will start to run and stub up. You see different clumps of them. It's because the seeds were pollinated and they blew over there.
Okay. Okay. All right. Keeping up, scanning questions. Okay. This may be one to just glance over for now. We always get a lot of these questions. Can you talk about deer resistant ground covers? Okay. Do you know off the top of your head of any deer resistant ground covers?
Oh yeah. Okay, so the woodland phlox, I believe, are deer resistant. The ginger is definitely deer resistant.
Okay.
The Caresta iris is definitely deer resistant. The Tiarella, I believe, is deer resistant. Okay, I'm visualizing myself going through. So now, are you talking about ground covers in general?
Yeah.
Ground covers that are native.
And we have a ground covers class native.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have a ground covers tour coming up for anybody who's interested in that. I can't remember the date, but you can check our website. And I will add, I end up saying this every class. We have some great classes on deer resistant, I'll say gardening. It covers like prevention tactics as well as plants that are deer resistant. So if anybody has trouble with deer, send me an email and I'll refer you to those classes. Because that's like a whole other, that's a huge topic.
So these classes that we do in Zoom, you can go back and watch them. Is that?
Oh yes. Yes. Yep. We have recordings. So if you ever have a topic that you missed, email me and I'll send you the recording. Or if you have a topic you're interested in and you're not sure if we have it, send me an email and I'll let you know. I'm happy to share this. All right. Here's a question. Moist in my yard comes with clay. Are there any examples of plants that you mentioned here that best tolerate the clay soils?
And we're talking natives again, right?
Natives, yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
So in a moist area, all the ones that I talked about for moist area, I have seen them thrive in clay. Northern Virginia is known for their clay. When they build here, they take away all the topsoil and what you're left with is clay. When you plant, you want to amend the soil. You want to do 2/3 of the clay to 1/3 of a soil conditioner. And a soil conditioner basically is ground up plant material. And so that air can get through, that there's, through to the roots. And water can travel easily or through there.
Okay.
Sometimes when you have an extremely wet area that takes, a long time to dry out, sometimes it's better to bare root the plant. And the reason why I say that is if you take a pot that has literally, I'm thinking inkberry. Take inkberry, the soil in there is basically almost all plant material, peat moss based. You stick that into a hole that's surrounded by clay and it's wet, then it literally will never, ever, ever dry out. And it's a problem and it might rot. But the plant can take it. So what you want to do is take that plant out of the pot, literally wash away all the soil in there and plant it in the 2/3 of the clay to 1/3 of the soil conditioner. So it's consistent soil all the way through. And in doing so, that plant won't have that puddle of water that we talked about, that it literally will go down pretty consistently so it can start to grow its root system. Another thing to do when you're planting, and I always recommend this, is using biotone. Biotone is a really good type of organic type of root starter or plant starter that literally, when you massage it into those roots, and those mycorrhiza and the fertilizers and the the bacteria and all that stuff are in those roots will grow extremely quickly compared if it doesn't.
Okay. All right. I want to get to two more questions. I think we're going to have time for that for sure, but there's two that I know are going to be widely of interest. The first one is, can we plant any of these shade plants this fall? So can you talk a little bit about planting times for these different plants?
Yes. So basically in our area, you can plant all year round. Sometimes in winter when there's a lot of snow on the ground, it might be really difficult. And that's probably the worst time to plant, but you can plant during that time because these plants are hardy to the coldest weather that we have. What I consider the best time to plant is in the fall, for perennials and also for trees and shrubs. And the reason why I say that is that when you plant in the fall, when you plant in September, October, November, and December, you literally are planting a plant that has stopped growing up. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to send out a root system during the winter time. Remember, when you have the surface and then you go down into the ground, it's very warm down in here. It's like 55, 45 degrees. It's not freezing. The freezing is up in here. So that root system is developing. As it develops, it gets larger and larger so that in the springtime, that plant will be able to grow. But the key to it is during the summertime. The hardest time for a plant to get through during the season is in the summer with that intense heat and drought. That root system is going to be a lot more established going in the fall than when you plant in the spring. When you plant in the spring, you're going to have to water it a lot more during the summer than if you planted in the fall. You will have to water, don't get me wrong, but just it's not as critical. And that's one of the main reasons why I believe that it's always best to plant in the fall. The plants don't look as nice, they don't look as pretty. Perennials literally start to get crispy. You might actually buy a plant that literally doesn't have anything in there. It looks like it's just dirt. But those are the plants that will grow out that root system, and in the spring they'll thrive.
Okay. All right. This is probably going to be one of our last questions. So just in advance, a reminder, anybody, if we don't get to your questions today, please remember you can send me a question through Eventbrite. You can email me at my email address, which I sent out by chat, or you can call Louie at the Fair Oaks store.
You call me. I'll be more than happy to do that.
Call Louie at the Fair Oaks store too.
And bring pictures
or come visit. Yeah, go visit Louie. He loves visitors. All right. So here's a question that we get a lot that's very popular. Screening evergreens. We've had more and more people asking us for native, like foundation plants, screening plants, those kinds of things, which is very exciting. Do you know of any native evergreen shrubs that you would recommend for screening plants that can grow like under shade trees? So it has to be a shade screening native.
Yes. Okay. So the first one is the Maryland holly.
Okay.
And I mentioned that it's right back here. The Maryland holly is probably the best plant. And the reason why I say that is, first of all, it grows everywhere here in Northern Virginia. Secondly, it's a dwarf variety so that it literally hovers the ground. You can make it into a formal mound type of plant, or you can let it go and become more of a natural form. The other nice thing about that plant is that it's a female. So you are going to get some very fall and winter interest on that plant with the red berries, and the birds will love you for that. So yes, that is probably one of the best scenarios for that scenario. The other one is the mountain laurel. There is dwarf varieties of mountain laurel out there. You can trim those to a certain degree. There's some out there that have some beautiful red stems on them, so they even look better, even when they're not in bloom. And they are a little bit tricky, as I talked to you about, but that is definitely something that thrives in shade. That's a native. The other one is there's a dwarf variety of the bayberry, and there's a dwarf variety of the inkberry. And both of those two, you can trim into a nice formal look, or you can let them go a little bit more wilder. So you have the inkberry, you have the bayberry, you have the Maryland holly, and you have the mountain laurel. The rhododendron, if you put it at the corner of the house, that's one plant that doesn't like to be trimmed a lot. It can get large. It would be a good foundation plant for like a bookend at the end of a house or something like that. I would not put that plant in front of windows or anything like that.
Okay. All right. It is 1:29, so I'm going to go ahead. Sorry. I'm going to go ahead and close questions. I'm sorry, guys. Again, like I said, contact us. We've had questions for where Louis is located. You can find him at the Fair Oaks store. Louis, what are your days that you're in right now?
Okay,
Sunday
so I work
Thursday?
every day except for Fridays and Saturdays.
Okay.
Okay. The thing I can offer is, first of all, if you want to come in and talk about your garden, take photographs of the garden. Bring it in and we can sit down and talk about it. We're going through, it's summertime. And if you don't like the heat, we can always come inside to the AC. We can sit down and talk about your garden, especially native gardens. The other thing is bring in, if you want to create a garden, bring in photographs of where you want to create it. Notice the sun. It's really important for me to understand where the sun is at certain times during the day, because then I can match that up. Also bring in measurements, of how big this area is, and then take pictures from far away so I have an idea of what the landscape looked like all around it, and then bring in some photographs of the actual area.
Okay.
And we can design some of these, small scale type of gardens. We actually do have a lot of great designers here that know a lot about native plants, and they would be more than happy to help you with more of the larger scale type of things. I am literally here at the nursery. I am not allowed to go out to people's homes.
We just got a question about that.
We have
So
a good
thank you.
staff that does that. So
Okay.
they want me to stay here and to do the smaller gardens, which I don't know at all.
All right. Okay. Well, Louis, thank you so much. Guys, please be sure to go visit him if you want to. And like he said, if you need someone to come to your house, we have a landscape design team, or need or warrant. We have a fantastic landscape design team that can come and help you guys with that as well. If you cannot get enough of natives, on Saturday at our Merrifield store, as I said, we have a container gardening class that is specifically focused on native plants for sun and shade. And that's being done by Caitlin Ackerhouse, who is one of our other plant specialists who is very good with natives. So that's at the original store in the Falls Church area. So contact us if you have any questions about that. And of course, you're welcome to attend that class. That's at 10 a.m. Check our calendar for any more upcoming classes on our website. Please reach out to us. And of course, go visit Louis at the Fair Oaks store. And I'm
always here. It's like a second home.
Yeah, I mean, I love Merrifield. We all do. Louis, is there anything else you want to close with before we say bye?
Well, I just, when I close on something that's personal to me is the more natives that you put in the garden, the more cultivars you're going to have, meaning the demand will go up. When I started working in this field over 25 years ago, natives were very, very low on the list, and there was hardly any of them out there. And now that the interest for natives have gotten to be so much, they're coming out with newer varieties of these things. And the more that you're interested in, the more that you buy natives, the more demand is going to be. And in doing so, they're going to create a lot more good, lovely natives for the environment. And I think in this day and age that's really important.
All right. Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much, Louis. As always, a pleasure. Love getting to catch up with you in these classes. Everybody, please have a great afternoon, and thanks for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for stopping in today.
All right. Bye all.